it has been quite a week or so. I meant to post this a while ago. Been going through a lot. Anyway, we are on the epilogue of The Baby Thief, so we are going to get started. The evil that men do lives after them. Change the gender of the protagonist, and Shakespeare could have been anticipating the pain caused by Georgia Tann. I saw it in the faces of her direct victims for over a decade, and I saw it in my own daughter's face when, during the winter of her sophomore college year, she spoke of a need to know her birth mother that was so intense she wanted to leave school to find her. She met her mother that following fall. Aided by the knowledge of her mother's surname, hospital records indicating her first name, and old city directories for Niagara Falls, New York, I'd found it easy to locate her. Okay, pausing here. New York is one of the most open states in terms of finding it, as we've talked about earlier. It was Alaska and Kansas have always been open. New York is one of the other leading states. And as of, I want to say it was like 2021, I believe, Cuomo, I know, but Cuomo pushed, or he technically vetoed a law in to open all records and reestablish adoptee rights. Okay, so we are and I am in New York, by the way, we are the only state that has that. Now, you have to have been born in New York, which can lead to a problem. So even though I live in New York, I wasn't born here, doesn't mean I have all my records, but I do have a good majority because I also am very privileged to have been born in a state that was fairly open. And again, my parents had kept a lot of this stuff and gave it to me. So I want to make that clear. Let me rephrase this. Barbara Bazant Raymond, searching and helping her daughter, and her daughter's location, right, her birth, are, I would say, somewhat of a privilege within the adoptee realm. I say that because there are other people who cannot have access, whether you're in the United States or not. There are people who travel to their home countries and can search for years and still have difficulties, right? A lot of people think that the search is really simple, and it's not. I'm going to tell you two different stories, okay? When I was searching for my bio mom, I was in my freshman year of college. And this is when I basically started. I knew her name, I knew general location. Again, I knew a lot of information that most people don't. And I still had a difficult time. Okay. Now, I did search off and on, and eventually it was, so I was 17. It wasn't until I was 21 when I actually found her. I decided to look in all my adoption records, find one of her brother's names who still lived in their home state, right, in the same area, and I called everyone by that name. Okay, now lucky enough, there was only 5 people, so it was really helpful, but I found that I was able to find them. If I had to call 40 people, I probably would have done that. Now, fast forward to 2020, okay, so we're talking, I'm now 29, I'm now 29, and I had been searching that entire time, since I was 17, also for my bio father. Again, knew his name, knew his general location, knew that he was most likely in jail of one of 2 states. I had a lot of information, and I still could not find him. Okay, so we are talking over a decade. We are talking in the United States. We are talking in a state that is fairly open. Okay, we're talking about Kansas. And I still had difficulty. And it wasn't until I used a search angel through Facebook that I was able to locate him, locate my older half brother and my older half sister, both of which I knew of. They still don't know that I exist. That's a whole story in itself. I did, however, in that decade, find my paternal grandmother, so my dad's mom, and I had called her, and that's a whole story in itself, but I was able to do that on my own, but I still couldn't find him exactly. So my point is that even in open states, right, even when you have information, doesn't mean that this search will be easy, right? And then there's the reunion part, right? There are people that have amazing reunions. It's like, it's kind of like you met your other half. You met like this. It's like a missing piece. It really is kind of rainbows and butterflies, and it just feels right? And like, you just kind of melt in, blend families, and it's like nothing ever happened kind of thing, right? Obviously something happened and you kind of have to retell the memories, but and then there's situations where it's like a mix, it kind of starts that way and then it pauses and then goes back, and like there could be problems, and then there's reunions where either nothing happens, right? Either the birth parent or the adoptee doesn't respond, right? Whoever's searching, or they don't want to be found. They don't want that relationship, right? And so it's a spectrum, and I want to make it clear to everyone that you cannot know until you actually go through it. Number one, you are not alone. Number two, you can have very vastly different experiences with either side of your bio family. And it's okay to search. And it's okay to not want that reunion part, just to know their information. It's okay to want that reunion. No one should ever stop you. Okay? So I want to make that clear. Okay. Continuing on. Oh my God. Gail cried when, at Beth's request, I phoned her. I've been waiting for this call. Tell Beth I married her father. She has 3 younger brothers. 10 days later, Beth drove with her boyfriend from her college campus in Bowling Green, Ohio, to Niagara Falls to meet her family. Parents, Gail and Salvatore, Sal. 3 birth brothers, 4 grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was a wonderful reunion. Like most reunited adoptees, she reveled in the similarities between herself and her birth relatives. She looks like both of her parents, uses the same gestures as her mother, and shares the family's love of cards and board games. Like her, they're confident, resilient, and thrive on competition. She learned her health history and recovered a family tree, an album full of pictures of distant relatives and of the home in which her ancestors had lived in Italy. And she received gifts her excited family had quickly assembled. An aunt gave her a photo album of Gail and Sal's wedding and of Beth's 3 brothers as babies. Another aunt had knitted an afghan bearing Beth's name and birth date. Her uncle Keith, an artist, had painted her portrait. She received sweatshirts with Niagara Falls logos, a Buffalo Bills jacket, and jewelry and flowers. Living with her family the following summer, and continued to visit them frequently afterward, Beth filled the gap that had always pained her. Her family got the chance to know and love her, and I, who'd felt threatened by Beth's search, learned that love isn't finite, and that adoptive parents who help their children search sometimes become even closer to them than before. Okay, pausing there. Barbara mentioned that she felt threatened by the search, right? Even though she helped her, she still felt threatened. It's that part the feeling threatened is what I think a lot of adoptive parents fear, right? And I want to make it clear that if you're an adoptive parent, whether you're new at this, or you're a hopeful adoptive parent, or you're relatively new, love your child enough to help them fill those gaps with the search. Do not feel threatened that they already had a family. They still have a family, right? There can never be enough love for a child. But that doesn't mean that you are going to replace or be replaced, okay? And it's only the adoptee who gets to decide. When you support your adoptee in their search and reunion, in their discovery, you sit there and listen to them, you help them, you take out your feelings, you have that, what's that term? Besides empathy, intelligent, wow, I can't remember the word. Anyway, you separate yourself from, like, your feelings, right? You can have your feelings, but kind of, like, keep it to yourself, or talk to a spouse about it, go to therapy with it, but don't ever put it on your child. That is key. The problem is that we often see adoptive parents do the exact opposite. They feel so threatened that they lie to their child. They don't tell them that they're adopted. They threaten them if they want to do search and reunion. And so a lot of the times, if an adoptee wants to do the search and reunion, they won't tell their adoptive parents, or they wait till they're gone. That's not fair to the adoptee. First of all, the adoptee never got to generally does not get to choose to be adopted, right? But having more people that love the adoptee is never a threat. That should be a compliment. Now, I'm not saying to blend your families. I'm not saying that's now your family. Please don't do that. But understand you are honoring your child's biological side and culture and history, and that is so, so important. Now, if you can keep it open, right? So a PAC agreement is post-adoption contact agreement, and generally they go for about 5 years. Unfortunately, in majority of states, they're not reinforced, right? But in your child's best interest, listen to the adoptee and continue to have that contact. If your adoptee does not want to have that contact with the adoptive parent, with the bio parent, say, hey, right now, the adoptee is feeling this way. This may be temporary. I still want to keep it open. I still want to give you updates. You can update me when they are ready. We'll bring it back to the adoptee, right? It could be once a year. It could be once a month. But just understand. But still listen to the adoptee on the lead. And I think that is really, really vital. Okay? The issue is that a lot of these adoptive parents really feel like, oh, well, I adopted this child. They're now automatically mine and mine only. All these people, like we heard from Georgia Tan, their past doesn't exist. That's not true, right? So even before you adopt, if you haven't already, or you're going through the process, please seek therapy. If you don't think you can deal with that, do not adopt, okay? But preferably I would rather you didn't adopt, but that's a whole different story. If you're going through this, again, seek therapy. Because it's not about you. It's not that they're doing this to get back at you at anything. There is a lot missing from our life. We feel like we're, a puzzle with missing pieces, right? Or, I'm gonna give, think of like Toy Story, right? Like a toy so loved, but then forgotten, right? Kind of that, maybe a bad term, but like, that's kind of like my thinking, right? All the lies. Think of, okay, bringing it to, I think it's Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3, when they're at the daycare, and Lotso had told the baby that their owner didn't love them anymore. And Lotso made everyone so miserable because Lotso missed their owner so much. Despite understanding that all the children at daycare love on them every day that they're there, right? Spreading that wealth, spreading that love. And so instead, he tried to make everyone miserable, including our Toy Story group, who were trying to get back to Andy, right? He would rather destroy Woody and Buzz and Jesse and everyone instead of helping and understanding, right? Think of Lotso as the adoptive parent, and think of the Toy Story group as the adoptee or adoptees, right? And think of Andy as the birth parent, right? That's kind of what it is. Wow, that's a really weird dynamic. But anyway, you guys kind of get the point, right? Like, if you look at things like that, you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's continue on. All 4 of Beth's brothers, the brothers she'd been raised with, Tim, and her birth brothers, Christopher, Michael, and Alex, were groomsmen at her wedding in May 2006. Gail, Sal, and Beth's birth grandmother sat in the front of the church with Bob, my mother, and me. When it came time for the traditional father-daughter dance, Beth danced twice, first with Bob and then with Sal. There were over 300 guests at the wedding. Virtually everyone teared up during the second dance. Okay, sorry. That is so sweet. I love that Beth was able to really combine her bio side and her adoptive side. Most people don't get to do that. But to see everyone together and love and support Beth as an adoptee is really beautiful. I am tearing. Some of us will never get that, but that is super sweet. And I wish more adoptees would be able to get that. Okay. It will be some time after all American adoptees who want to find their birth mothers will have the necessary tool, their mother's name that allowed Beth to locate Gal. Despite the progress made since the 1999 Tennessee court victory, adoptees' original birth certificates remain sealed in 34 states. The obstacles to access remain the same as those faced by the Tennessee Coalition for Adoption Reform, the National Council for Adoption, insecure adoptive parents, and people who believe that birth mothers don't want contact with their children, and that openness in adoption leads to abortion. NCFA and its allies are much better funded than the grassroots organizations fighting for openness. But adoptees will win, and I hope right will triumph over another of Georgia's legacies, the sale of children whose mothers were robbed of them or unduly coerced into relinquishment. The outright theft of children is relatively uncommon now in the United States. The availability of contraceptives and the virtual erasure of the stigma of single parenting have made single pregnant young women much less vulnerable than during Georgia's time. Most raise their children. Those who relinquish their babies often enter into open adoptions, in which they select the adoptive parents. So, FYI, open adoptions are usually pre-matched birth, right? So the bio parent chooses the adoptive parent. They get to speak with, kind of build a rapport with them. And then, like I said, with the PAC agreement, the post-adoption contact agreement, which, by the way, is a separate document from the actual adoption. Okay, so you have your relinquishment documentation, you have your adoption document, and then you have your PACA, the post-adoption contact agreement. Okay, anyway, and afterward maintain some degree of contact with their children. Again, that will also be lined in the post-contact agreement, right? So it's very, very specific about how long this it goes for. Like I said, majority go for 5 years. How often and how, right? So it could mean one PACA could be once a year with letters, right? One could be, visitations every so often, every like once a month, right? Like sleepovers. It could mean, phone calls. It just really varies from each PAC agreement, like again how often, but how it's done, how it's enforced, again also based on state, and who exactly is allowed to have contact, because in a PAC agreement it could be only the bio mother but never the bio father and never the grandparents, right? Some are more open. In almost all of them they will say, in the best interest of the child, the PACA, the agreement may close. I would say in general, again, very general, because every situation is different, majority of them should remain open, and should remain open at the request of the adoptee. Again, very rarely is the adoptee actually put in danger from the bio parent or someone in the bio parent's realm, right? Grandparent, friend, family, whatever. So I want to make that clear. There are situations where I would hate to say, but it's true that it is in the best interest of the child to close it, or, until they're of age and decide. But again, very, very rarely and case by case basis. Okay, continuing on. Today, most child stealing occurs in poor countries like Guatemala, India, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, Samoa, and China. The brokered children are both the benefactors and victims of the fact that adoptive parents are now eager to adopt children of all races. Let's also talk about the transracial / interracial adoption, and that there are more levels to trauma of that, and a lot of adoptive parents are not well equipped to handle the transracial adoption or transcultural. They often use this as a kind of gotcha moment, like, oh, I'm not racist because I have a, black child kind of thing. And they're not often willing to immerse themselves in these children's cultures to the point where it's beneficial for the child, right? And sometimes they'll lie to the child about where they actually come from. Okay? So let's just, that's a problem in itself too. Anyway, children whose parents can't care for them are more likely than before to get the adoptive homes they desperately need. But poor children who don't need adoptive homes are vulnerable to baby brokers anxious to feed the growing international market for children. Many of these current-day brokers are Georgia Tan clones. Typical is an American broker, Lauren Galindo. Between 1997 and 2001, she made $8 million by arranging 800 adoptions of Cambodian children by unwitting Americans, including the actress Angelina Jolie, who adopted a son through Galindo in 2003. Well, like George's birth mothers, Galindo's were impoverished And like Georgia, Galindo used spotters, aka baby recruiters, who located vulnerable women in destitute rural areas. The recruiters passed the mothers' names on to quote-unquote baby buyers, usually orphanage directors or taxi cab drivers who offered the mothers small amounts of rice or money for their children. The buyers often told the mothers that they could have their children back at any time, or that when the children became adults, they could petition for their mothers to immigrate to the United States. The children were then tested for hepatitis and AIDS. Children who tested positive were returned to their birth families. If the tests were negative, the child was taken to an orphanage or quote-unquote stash house. Investigating agents found conditions in these facilities horrendous. Naked, filthy babies lay in the hammocks covered with feces. The children were then assigned to prospective American adoptive parents who paid Galindo between $10,500 and $11,500 in adoption fees. With the children stored and purchased, Galindo furnished them with Cambodian passports by passing them off as orphans. She erased their identities, falsifying their names and histories, and giving them phony birth certificates. Galindo differed from Georgia in being sentenced by an American court to prison, if only for 18 months. Her justification for her crimes, it was, quote, "It was always my intention to save children from desperate circumstances, and I feel like I was always acting with the highest integrity," unquote. Georgia Tan would have said the same thing if she ever felt the need to defend herself. Okay, I want to make it clear. I think a lot of people have a heart for, the quote-unquote orphans, the babies that are starving. Here in America, at least way back in my day when I was a kid, you would see the quote-unquote starving African child, and they're in need and they're poor and blah blah blah, right? When in reality, majority of Africa is actually very wealthy and they're doing well. Of course, there's going to be smaller villages that are suffering, but they really try to play it up, right? And instead of, or they would do you too can adopt a child for 50 cents a day to help feed them, that kind of thing. And now, the other day I saw, oh God, it was so funny. An African TikToker did it, but for towards the Americans. God, I was dying of laughter. It was just so funny. Yep. Because we're going through shit too, But, I feel like a lot of us want to actually help children, right? I think the thing is that people really think that taking children from their country, taking them out of, I would say quote-unquote safe homes, although poor doesn't mean that they're unsafe, right? Or neglectful. Not necessarily. Do they correlate? And instead, they really think of the white savior, I'm rescuing them. When I think about it, right, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be helping countries how am I trying to rephrase this? I think there's other ways of helping, right? And I think we absolutely should start with our own country, right, here in America, where we do have children who are living in poverty, right? 63% of foster youth are removed due to poverty and not actual neglect. But instead of helping those in poverty, helping the homeless, helping all these situations, we're making it worse, right? We're in a government shutdown. They're getting, they want to not give SNAP and EBT and people aren't getting paid and people are like, oh, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and stuff like that. That's not actually helpful, okay? And the same people that are saying that are like, oh, we don't like abortion. We should be adopting all these babies. And it's like, if they actually looked at the statistics of, and this is related to the social programs that are funded by specifically Democratic presidents, not only do the adoption rates go down, but so do the abortion rates. So if you actually cared about getting rid of abortion, and I'm not saying that we should, but if they actually gave a fucking damn, sorry, I'm going to curse on this, you would look at that. Or you would advocate to help the impoverished, right? I'm not saying this has to be a Democratic side, okay? I'm not saying you have to vote Democratic, although it's helpful. What I'm saying is you should be advocating for better instead of wanting to take it away, right? Instead, you cast judgment on the homeless. You cast judgment on people who are going through things, and that's not helpful, right? Taking a child from their home country is not going to solve the bottom of the solution, right? We have to do better. And again, it's not just the countries mentioned, like Guatemala, China, Cambodia, Samoa, whatever other countries she mentioned. It's also bigger countries like the US, Ireland, France, UK. All countries have a basis. No country is perfect. Let's keep it at that. However, there are countries like Finland and Australia and New Zealand, for example, who are beginning to do better, who are looking at those and being like, no, we have to do better. What are the actual solutions to this, right? And that's important. Okay, sorry. I've been ranting today. Anyway, other Georgia Tan imitators operate in China. Quote, China has a growing black market in babies, often girls who are abducted or bought from poor families or unwed mothers and sold to parents who want another child, a servant or a future bride for their son, a reporter for China Daily wrote in 2006. Relatively few Chinese brokers are caught and prosecuted, but in 2004, over 20 people were arrested after 28 baby girls were found at a highway toll gate in Binyang, Gongzi province, stuffed into nylon tote bags, stacked on the luggage rack of a long-distance bus. The infants aged 3 days to 3 months had been drugged and bound. One, whose face was mottled red and blue with cold, had died. Ooh. Most of the people arrested were middle-aged women from Beijing, a policeman told news agencies AFP. They probably wanted to make some money. The baby-selling ring was larger than was immediately apparent. 52 people were eventually convicted of this crime. The source and the intended destination of the babies were unknown. It's possible the parents gave the babies away. Family planning policies very strict, and they probably had exceeded their birth limit and wanted to give the babies away to avoid fines, a police officer said. Perhaps some of them were born to unwed mothers or migrant workers. It's also possible that some of the children had been stolen. Children often balk at releasing embarrassing statistics, including the number of its young citizens abducted in front of schools, on streets, and in busy markets. Mark Magnier wrote for the Los Angeles Times in January of 2006, but experts say that the problem is growing. Despite repeated efforts by the government to crack down on traffickers, China has disclosed that it rescued 3,488 children in 2004. According to the official New China news agency, experts say those children are only a fraction of those lost. One of those lost is 6-year-old Chen Ying, whose parents last saw her in 2005 as she set off to school. Dressed in black and white checkered coat, her father, Cheng Zhu, had made a pencil drawing of her one night before she went to sleep. After she disappeared, he and his grieving wife showed it to reporter Magnier. "You can see why someone would want to abduct her," Cheng Zhu said. "She's so pretty." He and Cheng Ying's mother were unable to get any help from her school. The police wouldn't help either, and refused to even fill out a missing persons report. And when a witness later reported seeing a man with someone matching the little girl's description, the police refused to follow up the lead. Cheng Yin's parents earned only $200 a month, but they had done everything possible for their daughter, sacrificing to send her to a special Hope primary school. After she disappeared, they touched her face in her father's drawing of her, and in snapshots trying to connect with her. They were numb with sorrow, her father even thinking of suicide. "I just hope wherever she is, they're taking care of her," he said. Most adoptions of foreign children are legitimate rescues of children who would otherwise be warehoused in institutions or suffer a worse fate. But some children have been taken wrongly from their families. It's not unknown how many of the children placed with unsuspecting American adoptive parents have been abducted or obtained through fraud. But international adoption can cost as much as $40,000, and even a fraction of this can seem an enormous sum to brokers in countries where the average annual is $1,800, and Americans are adopting increasing numbers of children from very poor countries. Last year, nearly 23,000 children born abroad were adopted into American families. A reporter for the New York Sun wrote in 2006, "China is currently by far the most common go-to country for adoptive parents, with nearly 8,000 orphans visa granted from that country alone." Russia comes in a distant second, followed by Guatemala, South Korea, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. But adoption counselors say would-be parents are increasingly turning an eye to African countries, with celebrities like Angelina Jolie and Madonna adopting babies from Africa. The number of Americans seeking to adopt from that continent is likely to grow. There are more often many middlemen involved in foreign adoption transactions, and abuses can creep in along the line. Brokers seek out pregnant women and offer them money for their babies, who are then advertised on the internet. Notaries and agents take a slice to produce medical documentation, which is sometimes falsified. Other officials take a cut to issue passports and other papers, wrote a Reuters reporter in 2001. Adoptive parents are sometimes instructed to set out for a foreign country with large amounts of cash in their pockets for under-the-table transactions. One terrified prospective mother found herself in the dead of night handing over $8,000 to a bunch of Russian gangsters in the parking lot, the Reuters reporter continued. Such criminal operations also occur in Malaysia, where baby-selling rings are thriving, fueled by a shortage of babies available for adoption, reported by ABC Radio Australia in 2005. Police say that the gangs have been employed mostly by Indonesian women as prostitutes, denying them contraception so that they can conceive and then selling the babies. Baby stealing is less frequent in developed countries, but it does occur. According to the Interpol, brokering is being investigated in such countries as Greece, Italy, France, and Portugal, where the ringleaders are Bulgarian thugs. Criminal gangs dupe poor pregnant Bulgarian women into moving to Greece to secure what the women believe will be lucrative jobs. But there was no job. 23-year-old Yana Debrana Yordanova told reporters for the Belfast Telegraph in July 2006. Instead of being given employment, she was expected to surrender the child she was carrying. Rescued by an Athens, Greece organized police crime unit, Yana escaped this fate. But babies of other young women are sometimes sold to adoptive parents before their mothers even leave the hospital. What you have is too much money changing hands and too many people trying to get that money by producing babies for adoption, said Fred Greenman, legal counsel to the American Adoption Congress. Greenman is also the attorney who helped ensure that the 1999 legal victory that gave people adopted in Tennessee access to their original birth certificates. He's well aware of Georgia Tan and of the fact that the past is not yet past. It lives on in another Georgia Tan's legacy that leaves adopted children vulnerable. The curiousness of pre-adoption home studies. While the qualifications of some prospective adoptive parents are thoroughly examined, those of others are not. A fact that had terrible consequence for a 5-year-old Russian girl adopted by an American in 1998. Even a perfunctory study of Masha's new father, Matthew Mancuso, would have revealed that he had neither a bedroom nor bed for Masha, who was forced to sleep with him. For 5 years, he raped her and sold pornographic pictures of her on the internet. In 2003, Masha, then 11, testified against him at trial, and on May 3, 2006, she testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee regarding the need for adoption reform. A lot of people ask how anyone could let a pedophile adopt a little girl, she said, referring to the 3 agencies involved in her adoption. She continued, I found out after I was adopted that none of these agencies asked Matthew many questions. They never really checked him out. They showed him pictures of me, probably on the internet, before he had a home study to adopt me. In some of the pictures they showed him of me from an orphanage, I was naked. He told them he was divorced and had a daughter he wasn't close to. I found out later that the reason his daughter didn't talk to him is that he molested her too. While I lived with Matthew, no one ever came to check on me, even though the Russian government requires it. Since my story came out, we found out that 2 other kids, a boy from Romania and a girl from Russia, were adopted by pedophiles too. Just so you know, 14 other Russian kids have actually been murdered by their adoptive parents in America. I'm sure there are other kids in trouble, but no one seems to care about any of this. The Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption, a multilateral treaty that covers all adoptions between countries that ratify it, is trying to reform international adoption. Under the convention, agencies that perform adoptions in Hague countries will be required to meet standards meant to protect all members of the adoption triad. In particular, governments of adoptees' countries of origin must determine if adoptees are legitimately eligible for adoption because they were orphaned or were relinquished by parents who were not robbed, deceived, or bribed. Other provisions include more stringent investigations of prospective adoptive parents, full disclosure to adoptive parents regarding agencies' policies and fees, the preservation and disclosure of all information on adopted children, the paying of agency employees on a salary or for fee service rather than contingency basis, and prohibition of child buying. The convention's proposed requirements are admirable, but according to Trish Maskew, president of Ethica, a Tennessee-based nonprofit organization promoting ethics in adoption, they are not enough. The Hague regulations will only cover adoptions between 2 Hague countries. This would involve 11% of all foreign adoptions, the State Department estimated in 2003. Legislation to cover non-convention adoptions must also be passed. A crucial need is a law making the sale of or traffic in children for the purpose of adoption illegal. Such a law, advocated in the 1950s by Estes Kavere, the Tennessee senator appalled by the crimes of Georgia Tan, is indeed for all adoptions, both international and domestic. And information regarding adoptees' birth names and backgrounds has to be preserved and made available to adoptees, whether their adoptions have occurred in the United States or overseas. If knowledge of the long buried story of Georgia Chan teaches us anything, it is that the importance of ridding adoption of lies and secrets. Until we do, she and her imitators will continue to corrupt adoption. Okay. So that is the end of the book. I want to make it clear that in majority of cases, right, and I'm talking private infant adoption, whether international or domestic, are generally trafficking. Okay, people may not think this, but you are exchanging money as adoptive parents in terms of quote-unquote adoption fees to then get a child. You are buying a child. Okay? And you could be the best adoptive parent ever. You could do everything right. You are still benefiting from a system. Now, not every adoptee is going to say, feel the same way. I get it. A lot of adoptees will say that, or will equate adoption to slavery, right? You are maybe not to the same extent as chattel slavery, but we are given the job at birth to fulfill your parental fantasy. It's really not in our best interest. Now, that's not to say that some of us don't have good experiences or don't appreciate our adoptive parents. We love them, right? A lot of us do. A lot of us can have a good relationship, but that doesn't negate the history and the laws, okay? And that's where I'm coming at. We have to change the laws. We have to have these discussions. We have to reform, and there's different ways of people talking about reform, but the system, the way that adoption and foster care was always built, especially here in the US, was meant to target the impoverished, was meant to fulfill the fantasy of women and men, partners, couples who could not conceive. It was never really to help children, never in our best interest. And so, while yes, changing the laws is great and it's one step, some of us are a little bit more radical and think that we have to just completely undo it, right? Because how can you change a system that was built to do its job, and it is? Right? Just consider that. Anyway, have a great night. I will see you guys very soon. I will gather the next book. I don't know what it is yet. But I'll be uploading soon. So, see you then.